so much for joining us for this incredibly important and very timely panel. We just wanted to, again, give some reminders as well as set a few ground rules before we begin. We want to let everyone know that this is a safe space for each of the discussions that are taking place today. We have no tolerance whatsoever for any kind of hate, or for any hate of any kind. This includes homophobia, which includes transphobia, biphobia, anything and everything in between, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, misogyny, and sexism, just to name a few. If anyone does engage in this vitriol, they will promptly be kicked out and you will not be allowed back in to attend any other panel or infusion event. And if you do notice as an attendee someone engaging in this behavior, please don't engage this person. You can let us know over, by DMing us over social media. You can DM us the word flag, and one of our team members, who's right now on the panel as well behind the scenes, will promptly take action steps to recidify the situation and kick the person out. Also wanted to remind everyone that yes, this panel was supposed to start at 2:50, but all good. But if you are joining us for the next one, it's at 3:45 p.m., not 4 p.m. We had some technical difficulties with Zoom timing, so apologies for that. And also you can purchase all our brilliant authors who are joining us today, their books at Massey Books, which is an amazing local Indigenous owned indie bookstore based out of Vancouver. And also a bit of a reminder that you are eligible to win some prizes today, so check us out online for that. And I will let Chris and Susana, our moderators, take it away.
Thank you, and welcome everybody to this amazing panel of amazing people. First, I would like to acknowledge that today we are here on the unceded and ancestral First Nations territories, and I specifically am located on the unceded territories of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations in what's otherwise known as Vancouver.
I also wanted to give a land acknowledgement on my end. I acknowledge I live on the unceded territories of the Coquitlam First Nation, which lies within the shared territories of the Tsleil-Waututh tribe, as well as Kutsi, Musqueam, Squamish, and Stolo nations. And for finding out which Indigenous lands you live on, feel free to visit native-land.ca.
Thanks, Susana. And we have four wonderful panelists that I'm gonna ask to introduce themselves right now. And I'm just gonna start with whoever I see at the top of my screen, which is Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Sky. I am the author of the Love Curse series, and I'm going to be in the upcoming body positivity anthology, Everybody Shines, that comes out with Bloomsbury in spring, and I'm really excited about that. And I'm super honored to be on this panel today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And next one would be Tanya.
Tanya. So I'm Tanya Boteju. I am a writer and an educator living in Vancouver as well. And I'm the author of Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens, which came out last year. And I have another book, Bruised, that comes out next year with Simon & Schuster. And I'm also really honored and happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Tash.
Hi everyone, I'm Tash Mcadam. I write mostly queer action adventure. I have a 4-book science fiction story series called The Psionics, and a high-low trans youth boxer murder mystery from Orca. I am also an educator in Vancouver.
Thank you. And last but not least, E.Latimer.
Hello, yeah, I'm E.Latimer. I write about witches, mostly queer witches, and mental illness. And my book, Witches of Afternoon, came out in March.
Thank you. And so we are going to ask different questions, Susana and I, and we're going to take turns. And everybody is invited to share, but you don't have to. If you want to skip a question, that's obviously more than fair. So I'm going to let you, Susana, go ahead.
Thank you so much for those introductions, panelists. We'll do the first question. So, navigating the world as a young adult can be daunting and frustrating when your body doesn't fit the mold of how popular media portrays a hero. How do we shift the focus to show marginalized young adults they are the hero material in the first place? And how can we be active allies or advocates for marginalized bodies in media when representation is harmful?
Well, I think just what we're doing here, having these conversations, bringing light to the fact that marginalized bodies have been historically oppressed and left out of the systems, and which means left out of publishing and left out of media. And when we are brought in, it's often done in stereotype that's harmful and just further perpetuates further harm to marginalized people. So yeah, that's why I'm really excited about this panel today, having these conversations. To talk about this and to bring to light, you know, fat, disabled, Black, trans bodies. We have a voice, and it's time for our voices to be reflected in media and literature.
Yeah, I'll second what Rebecca said about these types of conversations being really important, especially kind of like calling out popular media that has really damaging stereotypes, and having those discussions about why that can be harmful and what could be done better. And then just lifting up marginalized voices that do write their own stories and obviously are doing it in a positive way, promoting those instead of the negative stereotypes.
Yeah, and addressing the negative and the harmful representations too, right? Like when we see something in literature and media, there are avenues now where you can try and address those, the creators themselves. I know that when I get feedback that's productive and constructive from readers about any sort of representation that I have in my books, it certainly informs my next book and the things that I'm working on. So as readers, you certainly have a voice there to really hold writers and creators accountable.
And even your purchasing power, like what books that you spend your money on, show publishing, and what shows you spend your money on, show publishing and media, what you want to see. Like I have a friend who works in a choose your own adventure video game, and they had marginalized bodies as options and nobody chose them, so they stopped offering them. So if this is important to you, if this conversation and giving voice to marginalized bodies is important, then you need to prove that with your buying power. You need to support authors, you need to review their books, share it with your friends, and that's how you can make the biggest influence.
And ask for it as well, not just the things that already exist, but let the publishers know that and the media know that there's a demand for these stories and that we want more authentic stories and more variety, and really like making that demand clear so that they try and then fill that need.
Thank you, panelists. Do you have any examples of this that you've implemented in your own writing?
I will say that I definitely am trying to get more representation of, in particular, mental illness in books that are not issues books. I mean, those are important and we need them. But as a young teen and a kid growing up, I lived in my library essentially. But I didn't see anybody like me in the books I love to read, which were fantasy and science fiction. And it's quite different now. I probably would find things now, which is good. We're moving in a good direction, but just to keep that going so that we have like the full spectrum of representation across all genres. So that's really important, to continue promoting those works and to write them, frankly.
Something that I think what I work really hard on in my own pieces is the normalization of trans bodies, instead of it being all about coming out and the trauma of being trans, which I think is probably 95% of the literature out there just tells you how terrible it is to be trans, especially the books that I was finding in my library, mostly by cis people when I was younger. So I try to make sure, for example, that nobody is ever identified as trans by being misgendered, which is a pretty common way of finding out someone is trans in a book. It's like, well, why lean into like a trauma when you're just trying to like establish someone as being marginalized in this way? Like, why can't it be something positive and to celebrate? And I think that for a lot of people who don't have that own voices experience, the tendency is to lean on those traumas of being marginalized and how hard it is and the struggle. Whereas we need more stories that are celebratory. Like the diversity in the world is one of the things that makes it beautiful, and we want those positive stories not to say they have to be without pain, because pain is authentic too, but to really emphasize celebration and the moments of triumph that you can have.
Yeah, I would echo what Tash said, in terms of representing queerness too. It's often, up until now, we've really seen a lot of unhappy endings. It's pretty typical. And then, yeah, the focus on coming out and struggling, and that being like the focal point of the story and the character arc. So something I was really committed to with Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens was not having that be a central piece for my protagonist. She already knows who she is, and not that there aren't pieces that are hard around that, but she isn't struggling to come out. She doesn't make a huge effort to come out. That's never a scene in the book. And then in terms of representing, I'm cisgendered. I am non-disabled, and so in terms of being somebody who doesn't have that lived experience, but also knows that these are experiences that are in the world, and my books are contemporary, and so I want to reflect the world around me, but obviously doing that responsibly is a huge piece when you're not part of that community. So for me, as an ally, I would say, like, I am still definitely at the beginning stages of working different voices into my books and different lives into my books, but using sensitivity or authenticity readers to make sure I'm doing that well, and also doing the research, to make sure that I am not misrepresenting any particular voices. Obviously, there's like a variety of voices within any community, so you're not going to capture every single voice, but not harming, right, is a big piece of that too. So for me, it's an ongoing journey of trying to figure out how to do that well, and not taking over too, because that's obviously not I gotta stay in my lane too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your answers. Sorry for the noise. I will pass it off to Chris for the next question.
Thanks, Susana. And yeah, agree 100% with everything that was said. Really important. So the next question would be, what language would we like to see normalized and also destigmatized so that young adults have the language to talk about their experiences in marginalized bodies?
I mean, I think for me, there's so many different intersections, right? For me, I'm fat and I'm disabled. And so those are words that are often used with the power of an insult behind them, calling somebody fat or calling somebody disabled. And that just adds to the stigma that being those things is wrong or morally less than being thin or able-bodied. And so for me, I try to use disabled and fat when I talk about myself, and because those aren't shameful things to me. They're just descriptors, just like thin, tall, short. But it is amazing how many people will call me everything but fat or disabled. They'll call me, differently abled or special challenges or chubby, thick, curvy, so. And I understand that comes because our history, fat bodies and disabled bodies and trans and Black bodies have been historically oppressed, and the systems are in place to oppress us. So people are just speaking from that training and ignorance, and to be able to normalize those two words specifically would make a huge difference in a lot of lives, and it would help to continue this movement and to show people that there's no morality to bodies. Your body deserves respect and dignity just as it is today, whether it's able-bodied, fat, thin, whatever. So I think language has a big role in that, and shifting our language and how we talk about things and what we use as insults or what we use as descriptors will make a huge difference to that.
Yeah, sorry, Tash, were you gonna say something?
I was just gonna say that I think intent is the piece that really shapes how we use language in books. For example, when I was growing up, gay was a huge insult. It was used all of the time. If someone was broken, it was gay. If something wasn't how you wanted it to be, it was gay. And now I'm seeing a lot of young people push back against the word queer, which for me is a wonderful word that I think really holds an umbrella around a community that is divided into different experiences. And there's kind of this like turfy Tumblr youth pushback where they're like, no, the Q slur, don't use it. And I'm like, well, that's the word that I found my home in. If you're going to use it as an insult, then of course don't use it. But if you're using it as a positive like umbrella term, then it's totally great. In the same way that the word gay is neutral on its own, which obviously isn't true of all words, and there are some words that we should not use in any context. But for a lot of words, they're historically used as insults, but they are also used as descriptors that groups have claimed and that have no positive or negative meaning, and it's all about the language that you couch it in your sentences, right? Which works for the word fat, as you were saying, like used as an insult historically, but it's claimed as neither morally positive or negative in and of itself. It's what the sentence that it is part of is aimed at. That was incoherent, sorry.
Not at all. No, I fully agree. Yeah, I fully agree. I have been shouted at for using the term queer as well, describing myself. And I often feel like as a bisexual woman, there's, you're sometimes like sort of barred from using that, or people want to police how you use it. And that gets frustrating. So I would love to see conversations opening up around that. But speaking to what, like one of the other main things I write about and the language surrounding it, mental illness is often a really loaded subject. And I cannot, like the amount of times that somebody has said in my presence, like, oh my God, I'm so OCD about this. And I'll be like, are you really? So I'd love to see stuff like that stop being like flung around so casually, or saying the weather is so bipolar and things like that can be really harmful to people that, because, you know, I don't fit the media definition of what OCD is like. I'm not tapping on things. I'm not washing my hands. So it's not outwardly evidence. So often people will throw that term around me because they're organizing their shelves, or they're picky about how they fold their laundry, and it gets frustrating. So I'd love to see more open, honest conversations about, yeah, that kind of does suck when you say that. And I often try to, I always want to, you know, tell my friend or tell a stranger sometimes even that this isn't really cool for you to say. But that type of conversation is often looked at as being oversensitive or confrontational. So that can be hard, and that can be a struggle, especially when you're young, when you're a teenager and you're first realizing that this is how you identify, or this is how you are. Having to have that confrontational thing is often really difficult.
Mental health is really weaponized in our language, where you,
yes.
When you start unpicking it, and racism as well, when you start looking at the origins of words and you're like, oh, actually it turns out like that's a really offensive thing to say. And it's almost like, because language has been shaped obviously by colonialism, the English language worldwide, it's like, those people aren't real people, so we can use them to example things that aren't actually what we mean, like saying the weather's bipolar, for example. Like nobody's actually saying that the weather has a mental health condition. They're like, oh, it's really changeable, and it's just become somehow neutralized, when in fact real people have that as part of their identity, and therefore it's not just a word to throw around for anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that, because, you know, the piece you said, E.Latimer, about the language that we also don't want to use, or that we should be careful about using. I know one thing that I really learned in my first go at publishing was my editor. There goes my computer. It's actually on a stack of books right now. I'm really gonna play here. Sorry about that. My editor really drew my attention to the language I was using that was ableist, you know, in terms of using crazy and stupid and dumb and all of these things. And for sure, I've had those conversations with people where I've talked about that, and, you know, they've come back at me with the, you know, how far are we going to take this political correctness thing? But, you know, to be honest, it's actually made me a better writer too. Actually finding language that is more specific, more meaningful, not lazy. And then it's made me much more aware of my own language in even everyday use, right? And the other thing I was going to add in terms of what I'm trying to do a little bit more, at least in the second book that I am just finishing up now, one thing I wanted to normalize, because I often do try and represent fluidity across the gender spectrum is normalizing pronoun introductions and usage. So there's just a couple of moments in the book where characters just introduce themselves using their pronouns, or ask their pronouns, or offer their pronouns. And, you know, hopefully that it comes around naturally in the book, but it was something that I was just seeing definitely more and more around me, certainly. And but I know it's helpful for lots of different people for lots of different reasons. So that was one thing I've just become a little bit more intentional about too, hopefully normalizing it.
I love that point. I just want to say, like, because I fully agree what you said about like finding your strength as a writer when you're like, okay, I don't need to use this word. Because my editor, and I was so grateful for her pointing this out, because like I am absolutely someone who's like, mental illness, let's fight this stigma, but I had dropped the word in crazy somewhere, you know, like, oh, this person's crazy, and then my editor had come and said like, hey, can we like tweak this a bit or move it around, or like let's take this out and replace it with something else, a stronger word that will be more specific to the situation that's also not offensive. And I'm like, yeah, that challenges me as a writer, and that, I believe that's a good thing. So absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, everyone. That was great. That was so many important points. And we're gonna head off to the next question. I'll let Susana take over.
Thank you, Chris. The next question is, what is a goal you've been wanting to reach with your future works in regards to body positive representation?
I feel like I'm always going first, but I'll go. For me, like, I really just want to see fat and disabled bodies in every single role. Like, I wrote a body positivity rom-com with like a disabled love interest and a fat lead, and now I'm writing like this fantasy with this fat werewolf slaying girls, like just some awesome like roles that I have never seen myself in. And so that's important to me, and it's important to me to reflect intersectional body positivity, which to me means the centering of anti-racism, trans, disabled justice, and fat liberation. So you'll always see that in my work. I mean, most readers, like the average person is plus size. 69% of the population in North America is plus size. And so that's, the average person is a size 16, 18, yet we see average characters are anything but that. This very popular YA podcast called Fat Like Me, they talk about YA literature. They tried to figure out how many books had fat leads last year. And out of all the books, they couldn't even find 20, but that's across the board, from public, like picture books to adult genre. So there needs to be some huge work there when 69% of the population is reflected in less than 20 books. So for me, that's really important. There's so much around fat bodies, like it's actually rooted in racism. There's a really important book out called Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Dr. Sabrina Strings, and I really feel like everybody should read it, because that was shocking to me too when I learned that fat bodies were Black fat bodies were deemed as bad, and they started showing like all this Protestant thin image of women, and to show like this was the good. And so there's a lot of roots of racism and fat phobia, and I think that the more fat characters you show, the more Black main characters you show, and so forth, that will counter that. So for me, for all my future works, that is definitely, you will always see that thread there.
I think one of the things that I've been working on, sorry, am I muted? No, is thinking about the autonomy of all of the characters who aren't my point of view character that we're following. And so trying to avoid that trap where you have your main character who maybe you connect to in a specific way as the author, and then having the other people rotating around them solar system wise, where their narratives are so focused on the like lead character that they can stop being individuals with their own background, their wants, their needs, their desires, and their own narrative. So something that I've been working really hard on, especially in an ongoing series, is really making sure that every character gets to have an arc. So they're each individuals, which I think has made the book stronger in general, but also has made sure that I am not just writing this one character's journey and then everybody else is only the supporting cast. and they don't get to have any growth. Or but I think we see a lot of that in YA, where almost because they're short and fast paced, you quite often get a main character who has maybe a love interest or a couple of best friends, but you don't get to see very much of those people's struggles or journeys and trials and who they are beyond their relationship to the MC. And so that's something I've been really trying to expand my scope on, more like TV show writing than movie writing, right? Where the movies that tight lens in for one or two characters, but in a TV show they tend to go around and really like flesh out everybody as a real person. And I think when there's that narrative for each character, it makes them more real and provides better, like different voices, different views within the same story, actives on the same plot almost.
Something I've been wanting to do, I mean, all of my books are going to be probably all going to be sapphic with you know, mentally ill lead characters, most likely. And something I really want to do is explore the different facets of like what it's like being mentally ill in different situations and in different, I guess, walks of life, and the different components of it that like a lot of people, it's just never discussed, because like I mentioned before, like in media, it's very much like you're pigeonholed, like this is what OCD is, this is what anxiety is, this is what panic disorder is. So just exploring how that can look different on different people, and going into as well like how like medication has been demonized and like that type of thing. And I have a little bit of that in Witches of Ash and Ruin, where the character is like so afraid of medication, and then she has her love interest say like, it may or may not be for you, but it's not going to like probably alter you in the way that you are afraid that it will. And that was something I wanted to explore, because that was my mindset initially, was bad. That's what I've been taught. So I want to explore more about that in my next book, and just like the common problems that people run into that are just never talked about, really.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, there's so many different things that are going on in my brain right now in terms of what what I'd like to be doing more of in my writing, and what I've always been committed to. I guess I'm pretty intentional about, stepping back as much as I can from my writing, and seeing where my blind spots are. When I started writing Kings, my protagonist was white until I got about a third of the way through the novel, and I had to actually sit back and be like, what am I doing here? What am I committed to? What story am I telling also? And ever since then, I realized like, wow, I have some pretty big blind spots, even for somebody who is, an intersectional feminist who has been doing diversity work for a long time, who is an educator, who's brown and queer, and a woman. And so that just like really pointed out to me how you kind of have to force yourself almost to look at what you're writing, and see where you might be falling into these tropes, where you might be falling into the dominant narrative that we all, live and breathe. And it's so easy, right, to fall into those. And so that's something I'm committed to. It's something that I'm working on more in terms of going outside of my own experience as a queer woman of color. Like that's something I'm pretty comfortable talking about, obviously, but not obviously, but it is. And so like, how am I representing ability or disability? How am I representing transness? How am I representing even, age, right, and body type, and body size. And so those are things I become a little bit more intentional about. And some people will say, well, like, you don't want to just write those characters for the sake of writing those characters. And I agree, you don't. But again, it comes back to what I was talking about earlier. It's like, how can you do that in a responsible way? How can you do that in a meaningful way, in a way that is doing good versus doing harm? And that's hard work. Like you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be willing to have people call you out, if you're not doing it well, and believe that, and do it better the next time, or not do it if you're not going to do that work. So yeah, just lots of things going on for me in terms of what I'm trying to move towards and create.
Thank you, panelists. It's such a fantastic effort to try to implement every single thing that we have to be conscious of in all of our work, and to continue to be politically correct in everything that we put out. So thank you for all of those points, all very sound and very correct. I'll turn it over to Christopher.
Thank you. The next question would be, what do you personally want to see in other people's writing in regards to more and better representation?
I want cis-het people to stop writing queer trauma as a primary narrative for queer people. I just don't think that making money off our pain is fair. Like, please have queer and trans characters, research them properly, but don't make their narrative be about how much being queer or trans can suck until you like find the moment where you step into your own full realized human being and everybody accepts you for who you are. Like, let them fly spaceships also.
Yes.
Yeah. The same for oh sorry, Erin, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say same for fat and disabled characters. Like I'm tired of seeing a fat character be the bully. Like Harry Potter is the perfect example. There's not one well portrayed fat person in the whole entire series. And yeah, it would just be so awesome to see, especially in middle grade and in younger literature, kids see themselves represented as all different types of hero. You don't have to be the main character to be a hero. I think it was Tash who was saying that your characters need full rounded arcs. They need to have their own goals, whether they're a first character, secondary character, or tertiary character. Make them fully fleshed people, and that will really help. And really research if you want to write a marginalized character that doesn't share your worldview. Research the stereotypes that are associated with those characters. Interview people who share those marginalizations, read works by authors of those marginalizations, and do your research. And then also, as Tanya was saying, hire sensitivity and expert readers to go through after to make sure that you don't have any blind spots that are going to be harmful to your readers. That is your responsibility as an author. If you're wanting other people to read your book, you have that duty to make sure that you're not harming. So yeah, I think that what these guys are saying was pretty right on with that. Like, give us fully fleshed marginalized characters.
And if you're called out, do not double down on being the worst.
Yeah.
Yes. Someone's kidding. This is actually harmful. Don't be like, no, it's not. It's definitely not. It's brilliant. Excellent representation, and double down the whole time.
And then get your really famous friends to back you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would really like to see in people's writing and in mental illness, in particular, like Split was the movie that came out in 2016, and it was like I was like so angry in the movie theater because I was like, okay, his whole thing is that he's a serial killer because he has multiple personality disorder. That's just lazy writing. That's the other thing too. It's like your character and your villain is not a fully fleshed character, real person with with motivations that make sense. You've just tacked on a mental illness and said, this is why he's evil and kills people because he's crazy. So I'd love to stop seeing that in all art in general, and see real people represented with real mental illness and portrayed in nuanced ways rather than ugly stereotypes.
Yeah.
So that's my suggestion for people. Don't be lazy when it comes to writing. Do it properly.
I mean, I echo everything everybody said, but the only thing I would add is in terms of appearance, what we're still seeing is traditionally, conventionally beautiful characters, attractive. Again, all of this is
whatever that means.
Conventional sense, right?
Sexist,
what we've been fed. Yeah.
Racist version of what's attractive. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. What we've been fed. And so, I just want to, I'd like to see in my own writing too, I'd like to see a little bit more attention paid to constructing those character traits so that it's not constantly, I mean, body size is definitely one of those pieces, but also just like in terms of like hair color or hair on your body or, or, nose size, whatever it is, like it's, like, can we get beyond, blonde hair, blue eyes, thin, and, I've been guilty of this for sure. Again, like blind spots, right? So, people being a bit more intentional about that piece, I think is something we could see a little bit more as well.
Especially for our YA female protagonists. They all fit into a very similar cookie cutter shape.
Yeah.
Does anybody off the top of their head maybe have an example where they know of another writer who's done that really well, who's like been mindful of this?
I really liked Michael Grant's Post-Gone series. He has a sequel. So Michael Grant is an old straight cis white man, and his daughter is trans, and he includes a gender fluid character of color, in fact, in his sequel series. And I was a little bit nervous. He also has a black lesbian is the main character in the sequel series, so he's got quite a lot of diverse voices that he is writing, like it's not first person, but he's in their point of view, like their point of view characters. And I thought he handled it really well. I thought there was great nuance, and that he had clearly like talked to people a lot and had sensitivity readers and picked through kind of the more dangerous messaging. And even though there is trauma and harm for those people in their lives, I thought he handled it pretty gracefully.
Adam Silvera is also someone I will always hold up as somebody who quite frequently puts very well portrayed mental illness into his books and explores that in a really sensitive, wonderful way, actually. So
Gabby Rivera's, I mean, the Juliet Takes a Breath, which is kind of a modern classic as far as I'm concerned. The protagonist in that is definitely not your conventional beauty. She's queer, she's a woman of color, she's dykey, and a few of the other characters in that book too, maybe because it's set in the 90s as well, that we see like a different aesthetic of lesbians, of queer women that we don't see as much now, maybe that's become not cool. That butchier sort of look, which also is a stereotype in some ways, but then is accurate in other ways, right? Like there are people in the world who look like that as queer women, and so, but it's not necessarily palatable. And so she does that, I thought, really well. And then Claire Kahn, her first book is Let's Talk About Love, and she's got a fat black queer protagonist who is also really anxious, but that's not, her body size and her queerness are not, struggles for her. It's just part of who she is.
I also like to shout out Undead Girl Gang for the same thing. It's not an all-white cast, which is nice, and there's a Rebecca, I don't know, have you read this?
Yeah.
I don't remember if it's the main character that's a fat girl or, I think so. Yeah. It's very good.
I was going to recommend that one. And
sorry.
I love Claire. No, that's good. You have it, like mine's just behind me. Julie Murphy, everybody knows her for fat positivity. If you haven't seen the movie Dumpling on Netflix, go watch it. N.K. Jemisin, she's amazing for fat rep and fantasy. Renee Watson, Renee Watson, she's so great. She's going to be in the anthology with me, and I'm fangirling like crazy about that. There's some really good fat rep going on, but it's rare, and so definitely support the ones listed and the ones listed in here for all the different intersections, because
also, sorry. I was just going to say, I love what Tanya said about classically, like, we have had a lot of, like, I love novels with girls kissing girls, but, like, I definitely can see a pattern of, like, they look a certain way. There isn't a lot of, like, butchier love interests or main characters. And so I'm sure Tash is going to be like, oh my God, again. But I'm definitely going to recommend Gideon the Ninth, because Gideon is like, oh, it's so good. But yeah, Gideon's a good representation of somebody who's more butchy. She like talks about like her sword play and doing like push-ups and stuff all the time.
She grabs her porno mags and her sword to run away in the first scene, and I was like, I love
so
this character already. Like, this is what I'm packing. It's porn and my sword.
Yes.
That reminded me. Oh, sorry, Erin.
No, I was just going to go on about how good it is. Go ahead.
Yeah, we could do a whole panel on Gideon.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Julia Ember has a book coming up. It's a Phantom of the Opera retelling, and there's a fat love interest, and I'm really excited about that. So I've heard good things.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those. And I'm going to give it a...
Sorry, just, also Rick Riordan Presents. So Rick Riordan, very famous author of Percy Jackson, has supported a lot of different authors to write demigod retellings from their own cultures. So he's using this platform, there you go, to elevate people writing about their own cultures, because he did the Norse and the Greek mythology, and he wanted to like expand the world and demigods. And so there's some really great writers in that line. We're excited about the new coming out.
And if you're looking for somebody who's a good example of like being an ally, I feel like Rick Riordan is great, because he wasn't like, let me take on this other mythology that doesn't belong to me. No, he handed the reins off to other authors. So I think that's a great example of like being an ally instead of trying to take the spotlight yourself.
He also has a gender fluid character who uses both male and female pronouns, switches back and forth, which is the first time I've ever seen that in a YA, in his Magnus Chase series. And they're the love interest, which I was just like, awesome. When does that ever happen for this hat white boy at the center of this narrative falling in love with this like bi-gender child of Loki? It's
amazing.
Yeah, it warmed my heart.
Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't catch all the titles, but I caught most of the author names, and I'm just going to put them in the chat for people to research on their own. Yeah.
Janet's on board with a panel just on Gideon the Ninth, so I feel like now we have to.
Absolutely, let's do it.
YA Infusion After Hours.
Perfect. So we can move on to the next question. I did prepare an extra one just in case we go through this next one quickly. What role should publishing play in addressing these issues, and what changes would you like to see?
They can buy our books.
They can hire agents and editors and like new people who are coming into the industry who are making zero money. So obviously then there's a certain type of people who are able to do those internships and those like minimally paid positions, which really leans towards a specific set of humanity where there's already most of the power in publishing. So like maybe support more marginalized people in the background of publishing, not just the authors' voices. Obviously, definitely the authors' voices as well.
Yeah, I think definitely just what Tash said is about like it's systematically just like deep into the core of publishing that it's like set up to be straight, white, and cis, just because these are the people. Yeah, these are the people in power, and these are the people that can afford to do the internship in New York without being paid, right? Like, so I think they have to tear down some of this internal structure and like
stop paying James Patterson $8 million for every book and maybe put that into young upcoming writers.
Yeah, set up a system of grants or something. Like do something so that people
royalties versus advance systems, so people actually make money from their books rather than just because the same people are getting the same massive advances, and then publishing houses are like, we have no money for advertising, and it's like, well, how much did you spend on the same 4 people? Like, they're very rich. Like, J.K. Rowling does not need another massive advance. Like, maybe take some of that money and give it to people who could, like, really thrive when supported. Like, how much time do people even have to write if they're working 3 jobs and supporting their families and stuff? Like,
yeah, especially if they don't have that privilege of a spouse that makes more money, or they're a single mom or a single dad. Yeah, like, And then also, yeah, just like like I said, in New York, like an internship at a publisher to become an agent, like how much are you spending? And is the internship not paid? Like, I don't know. It used to be not paid. So you have to be very privileged to get into that position. So it's kind of set up to be very white and so on, right? So.
And then you get the classic, didn't connect with the voice response.
Exactly.
Like,
yes.
Is it perhaps because you have never read a voice that isn't your voice?
Yeah.
Throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Yes.
CCBC librarians did like a diversity study, and it was pretty appalling to see how the numbers haven't risen as much as I'd hoped they would. But like, for instance, disability rep from last year's books, only 3.4% of all the books had disability rep, and that includes mental health rep. And the average population, there's 25 to 40%, depending on the study, of people who are disabled. So like, really the numbers aren't reflecting the population. And like I said, there's not even 20 books with fat main characters, yet 69% of us are fat. So those things, definitely publishing needs to start buying not just cis white straight voices. You know, they need to put their money where they say their support is, and show that in all areas: what they buy, who they hire, who they promote within the companies.
Take responsibility for the system that they're part of.
Yeah, they built the system, and books are, we influence culture, so it's so important what books publishers buy and what they're putting out. And it's been so great, like the literature, the YA community, especially online, that there's some fierce advocates who have made some huge changes. And it's not publishing making these changes, it's mostly Black women fighting tooth and nail to make changes. And yeah, almost always, yeah. And it's been so encouraging to see the changes coming, but they're not coming fast enough. And yeah, I don't know, we need more. This is just the beginning of the wave.
Tanya, do you have anything to add?
No, I think, I mean, that would have been my answer as well, is looking behind the scenes for sure. One thing that I mean, this is maybe a small piece, but maybe not, in terms of the publishing process. One thing that I've been thinking about is just even cover design. It's just something I've been considering with Kings. It was something that I was thinking about too. There's different bodies on the cover for this, and I loved it. As soon as it came out, I got the cover design. I loved it right away. But there were definitely still some tweaks to be made in terms of the representation of bodies on there. And so I'm just thinking about that in terms of the covers you often see, even if the story is or does have a fat protagonist, for example, or does have representation of disability, that you don't often see that in the covers. So I mean, that's part of the publishing process, is part of just a lot of the different questions we've been talking about today. So, I just want to actually see that visible representation as well, and not shy away from it. I think that's indicative of this this tendency to like sugarcoat or to, again, make it palatable, right? And so like let's counter that narrative, and because I think that there's definitely desire for books like this. There obviously is, and so that excuse that it might not help the book sell, I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. So that's just one piece in addition to the pieces that everybody already mentioned.
I think especially with YA, a lot of the time we're not listening to the actual audience. Like, yes, a lot of adults read YA, but YA is supposed to be for young adults, and they often don't share the same platforms to talk directly to publishers and things. So, but they also don't often have money to go and buy their own books themselves and things, and they're being blocked off from that access by families, by libraries. And so there really needs to be a push to make it accessible, so that they walk into their library and they see themselves on a cover, rather than being in the position that I was in as an 11-year-old, being like, I would like books about girls who want to be boys, like to my local librarian, just in the off hope that they would find something for me.
Absolutely. All of these points are so important. Thank you so much for all of your opinions, panelists. Do we have time for one more question?
Sorry, I feel like you guys are waiting for an answer from me. Of course we do.
Yes.
Technically, there's supposed to be another panel starting now-ish, I think, which I am also in.
Yeah, we're good. We have like an extra 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to, as the conversation was ramping up with the second question, I wanted to tie it back to it and ask, how do you normalize in your writing or encourage education on political correctness in your characters? Like, where do we see characters correcting like other people's pronouns, or destigmatizing mental illness, encouraging research, or, you know, widening their circles to more BIPOC individuals that could diversify their inner circle? Do you have any examples in your own writing?
I hate the term political correctness with like a radical passion.
I'm with you.
Like, well, I'm only correct because politically now I get cancelled if I don't know. It's called respect, and it's about being respectful of different experiences and different people. And I feel like the term politically correct has been really weaponized and used to kind of dismiss valid concerns, like you're being racist, and they're like, "Ooh, snowflake!" And you're like, well, no, just like you're being a huge and terrible person currently. If you could just not, that would be way better. And they're like, ooh, triggered. And you're like, that's a mental health issue, actually. So that wasn't an answer to your question. It was just a small rant. You're welcome. I need to go back and look at the question again. I forgot what it was.
I think something that often gets forgotten or neglected is the fact that you can take apart something in the narrative of your story. Like if you have a character who is acting, I'm not gonna name any names or give any examples because I don't have the energy to do that. But I have seen books where there is a main character acting terribly, for example, often in a racist fashion, where the idea of that the author has is, oh, we're going to make him or her like have this like awakening and like become a better person. And often it's like, why do we need that narrative from the white point of view? We really don't. And the other is often that the author fails in their writing to deconstruct things in the narrative in a way that's that tells the reader that this is not okay, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it really does come down to your writing. I think if you get a big reaction from either sensitivity readers or people, your audience, and they're saying this is harmful, it's because A, you haven't done your research, or B, you haven't accomplished what you set out to do essentially as a writer. And it is in part because you needed to be more careful, you needed to do more research. And it's also, I think, because you failed to tell that narrative in a way that connected with people in the way you intended it to.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying is so on point. Like the story shouldn't end, the climax shouldn't be, hey, I'm no longer racist or fat phobic or ableist, I'm better now. That should be like the beginning and the redemption and the apology.
What are you doing
the hard work?
Yeah.
What are you doing to make up for your actions? And I think in my work, I try to have those micro conversations between characters. You know, one will be like, actually, my pronoun is not that. And they're like, oh, shit, sorry. And, you know, you have those little the conversations between your characters that just have those conversations. And then you see that how the characters act. Like your actions dictate more than your words in reality, right? So I like to try to represent that. And I don't think it needs to be like a big issue. Everything doesn't need to be a big issue in a book, but I think that it's important to have those conversations, whether it is micro or macro. And yeah, and they can't just stop as, hey, now I'm no longer racist. It's like, okay, what am I going to do to be anti-racist? What am I like, and show your characters having those journeys. What am I going to do to be anti-fat phobic? How am I going to change that mentality in my head? And yeah, that's what I try to do in my writing. It's hard because there's so much ingrained ignorance or bias. Like I'm a fat girl and I still find myself being fat phobic to myself half of the time, you know? So I'm still working on those internalized thoughts and lies that have been trained into me since youth. And so I want to reflect that because no matter what your intersection, there's always things that you don't get or understand, or you can grow in areas, and our characters shouldn't be perfect humans either, and they should be growing and learning too. So
Perfect. Does anybody have anything else to add? Okay. Well, I think we can wrap this amazing panel up. Thank you so much for sharing all of your points of view, perspectives, and opinions. They have all been so educational and have brought in definitely so much more, many horizons for many of our listeners and viewers. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. That was amazing. I had high hopes for it and they were exceeded. So thank you all for sharing. This was great. Thanks so much.
Thank you for moderating. You guys are awesome.
You guys were awesome.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Sorry, just pointed quickly. Respond to Janet here. Correction. But yes, thank you all so much for joining us for this panel. Chris, Susana, of course, you killed it. And I will see you guys soon. Sorry, I have to jump to the other one. But I will talk to you guys
Thank
really
you.
soon.
Bye.
Bye. Have a
Bye.
brilliant day. Have a brilliant day, both of you.
You too.
Yeah.